supply Ukraine with a large number of cheap AI-guided attack and interceptor drones, where you provide David with something which he can take on Goliath in a decent asymmetric way. Everything to do with warfare at the moment goes back to JFC Fuller's theory of war, which was over 100 years old, which sort of says for every improvement of warfare, that is checked by a counter improvement, causing the advantage to shift back between the defense and the offense. And it's always this trade-off really between the sword and the shield. But what's really interesting about the interceptor drones, particularly those who are going against the Iranian Shahed 136s, is that one of the other things that we've seen in this war, the Ukraine-Russia war, is really the rise of the military technological complex, not the military industrial complex. What I mean by that in this context is that one of the things which has happened in the last few years, particularly from 2024, is with, for example, a program called White Stork. That is a drone development program which was initiated by Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google. And that is, the aim of that is to supply Ukraine with a large number of cheap AI-guided attack and interceptor drones. That is ultra low cost, so there's a trade-off between the Shaheds being quite expensive, long range, 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers with a 30 to 50 pound or kilogram warhead, and a cheap interceptor, which is this low-cost AI-powered kamikaze drone, which even cannot be jammed even in a GPS environment. So it's trying to use the David versus Goliath sort of concept, where you provide David with something which he can take on Goliath in a decent asymmetric way. Remember that the Shahed 136 is not really that sophisticated. It's essentially a kamikaze loitering munition. It is not of the same capability at all of what many people would see as an equivalent system, such as the Israeli Harpy, but it's not like that at all. An Israeli Harpy is so sophisticated that it can deal with SEAD and DEAD missions. Now, SEAD and DEAD missions we're going to see potentially in the next few weeks, because that is suppression of enemy air defense and destruction of enemy air defense. It is the sophistication of hunting radar systems, which will be crucial if the Americans or Israelis go into Iran, because that controls a number of different ballistic missile launchers. If you blind the radar, the launchers can't do much, and that's a far better trade-off in how to do business. The Iranian drones and the way that the Russians are using them does not have that sophisticated capability. What would be interesting in the future is if that capability and innovation and adaptation comes into the Ukrainian side, giving them a SEAD or DEAD capability, allowing the remainder of their systems to go in and fight and win their own deep battle. A drone incursion in Europe would be obvious if it was something like the capability of a Shahed 136. And when you're talking about hybrid warfare, one of the aspects of that is plausible deniability. So you would probably use serious organized crime or subcontract drones to just mess up airspace at the time. You're not going to use anything which has a signature equipment on it, which can be traced back to the originator of the threat. That's why hybrid warfare is often so difficult to do. And you certainly wouldn't necessarily use interceptor drones against sort of low-end unmanned aerial vehicles that we've seen, because again, the drones that we've seen over, for example, Danish airspace or around Copenhagen, for example, are really sort of small or micro drones. They are not tactical, medium or high level drones. There's a classification of 5 types of drones. They're more the sort of DJI-C, which is the sort of the Chinese models which you can almost 3D print, and that has become the most ubiquitous small drone. It's that 1.5 kilogram payload which is used, for example, all the small and micro drones, which is used in the close battle. That is that kill zone that we see, and why there's a glacial pace of advance from the Russians. Well, there is a integrated air and missile defence within the NATO framework. A lot of people would say that that is not sufficient, and I think I'd probably go along with them. So, for example, from a UK perspective, in terms of the high-end ballistic missile defence, we don't really have that apart from Type 45 destroyers. So you either go campaigning in Type 45 destroyers with the Royal Navy, or you park them somewhere where they can knock down things that might be coming towards um, London or elsewhere. So again, that's why there's a weakness, I think, in NATO within the integrated layered air defense. Some countries are better than the other. So, for example, Netherlands has high-end Patriots, Germany has high-end Patriots. The Brits, apart from those Type 45 destroyers, have nothing like that. But we know that the sort of speed of innovation, as I talked about, is beginning to kind of gather some form of pace within NATO, and indeed part of the support to Ukraine, which of course is also part of the industrial and technological base that I mentioned, is part of the drone coalition, which is one of the elements of what was the former Ramstein format, which supports Ukraine. And the Brits, for example, I think in the last year aimed to give 80,000 drones to the Ukrainians. And the best form of forward defense is to make sure that Ukraine doesn't lose and is able to take out as much capability of someone who might be an enemy to you in the future. That is the way that you ensure deterrence for the future. Power of resistance is partly based on the will of the people, and if the Russian deep battle seeks at the moment to freeze the Ukrainians into submission, then making sure that you can try and protect the remaining parts of your energy infrastructure, although they do have this sort of notion of invincibility shelters and the number of generators that have been given to Ukraine over the years, because of course the winter of 2022 was also a similar pattern by the Russians when they first sought to freeze the Ukrainian into submission. So anything which gives you hope for the future in terms of the effectiveness of your systems to enable the resilience of your people, it's not only got a tactical aspect to it, it's also got a psychological aspect to it in the resolve of the Ukrainian people. And again, one of the interesting things I think in the last week is looking at the opinion polls in both Russia and Ukraine. They're very, very similar in terms of each side wants to kind of negotiate, but neither side is willing to, in the polling terms, concede to the other side's maximalist sort of positions. So the Ukrainians don't want to concede in terms of territorial stuff, and the Russians don't want to concede in terms of not wanting the territorial stuff. And that is why we still have this impasse in terms of negotiations. So enabling the power resistance is absolutely critical, and why interceptor drones help in that in the deep battle.